I don't want you anymore in my life. It is over between us.
Please, what have I done to you?
What would you do if your husband threw divorce papers at you while you were 4 months pregnant, the same day he became a CEO? The man you sacrificed everything for. The man you funded when he couldn't afford transport money. And now he's telling you that you're not good enough for his new level, that you're too village to stand beside him at corporate events. Can you feel that betrayal burning in your chest right now? Can you feel that rage? But here's the twist he never saw coming. The company he thought he built? She owned it. Every single brick, every share, every decision. The headquarters sat on her land. The investors? She arranged them. The survival during recession? She funded it. He just didn't know it yet because she chose silence over spotlight, humility over pride. This is a story about what happens when a man mistakes his wife's quiet strength for weakness, her barefoot service for stupidity, and her love for liability. If you've ever been underestimated, if you've ever been discarded like you meant nothing, if you've ever been told you're not enough by someone you lifted from the ground, stay with me. Because this Nigerian woman didn't just get revenge. We're not just telling stories here. We're reminding the world that underestimating a quiet woman in sweatpants and Ankara is the most expensive mistake a man can make. Let me show you how one woman turned betrayal into a boardroom lesson that shook Lagos business circles forever. Let me know in the comments. And if this story gave you chills, if it reminded you of your own power, share it with someone who needs to hear it.
Subscribe and stay blessed.
Stay powerful. Stay patient and never, ever let anyone mistake your silence for weakness. Chioma Okafor stood barefoot on the cool marble tiles of her Lekki Phase 1 kitchen, one hand resting gently on her 4-month belly, the other stirring a bono soup in slow, deliberate circles. The aroma filled the house, rich, earthy, comforting, but it couldn't mask the sound of her husband's voice echoing from the living room like a megaphone at a political rally. And when I take the stage at the official banquet next month, Emeka boomed, practicing his CEO acceptance speech for what felt like the 100th time that morning. I will remind everyone that hard work, vision, and determination are what separate the extraordinary from the ordinary. Chioma's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. She turned down the heat and wiped her hands on a kitchen towel, glancing toward the living room where Emeka stood in front of the floor-length mirror, adjusting his imported Italian suit. The price tag had read 850,000 Nigerian nairas. He'd bought 3 of them last week. 7 years. That's how long they'd been married. 7 years since she'd met him at a business networking event in Victoria Island, back when he was a hungry entrepreneur from Enugu State with fire in his eyes and nothing in his pockets. She remembered the night he'd confessed he couldn't afford transport fare home. She'd driven him herself, listening to his dreams about revolutionizing Nigeria's agricultural supply chain. His passion had been intoxicating. So, she believed in him. When he needed money to finish his MBA, she'd pulled from her savings. When he couldn't get meetings with investors, she'd made calls, quiet calls to family friends, business associates of her late father, people who owed the Nwosu name favors. When Prestige Holdings was just a proposal on paper, she'd been the one who connected Emeka with the founding board members over dinner at her family's Victoria Island estate. And when his startup needed someone to manage the home, to create peace so he could focus on building his empire, she'd resigned from her bank job without hesitation. We're building something together, she'd told him. Your success is our success. But Emeka didn't see it that way. Not anymore. He saw a woman in faded Ankara house gown stirring soup at noon on a Wednesday. He saw sweatpants on Saturdays and natural hair tied back with a scarf. He saw someone who attended charity bazaars selling akara to raise money for widows, not someone who belonged in boardrooms and executive galas. he saw ordinary. Chioma turned back to her soup, her hand moving automatically, her mind somewhere else entirely. In the living room, Emeka's voice rose another octave, drunk on his own greatness, rehearsing gratitude for people who'd done nothing while erasing the woman who'd done everything. She touched her belly again, feeling the gentle flutter of life inside her. For months, a baby boy, the doctor said. Emeka didn't know yet. He'd been too busy celebrating to ask. The knife she'd used to cut vegetables earlier sat on the cutting board, and for a moment, she stared at her reflection in the blade. Distorted, unfamiliar, quiet. Outside, Lagos traffic hummed. Inside, a storm was gathering, and Emeka Okafor had no idea he was standing in the eye of it. At exactly 12:30 p.m., the kitchen door swung open with enough force to rattle the hanging pots. Emeka strode in, his black Italian shoes clicking against the marble like gunshots. Behind him came his younger sister Miriam, arms folded across her chest, eyes gleaming with something that looked like triumph. And beside her, a woman Chioma had never seen before, tall, light-skinned, wrapped in a tight red dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Her perfume arrived before she did, expensive and aggressive, clashing with the warm smell of ogbono soup. Chioma looked up slowly from the stove, her wooden spoon still in hand, steam rising between them like a barrier that was about to be crossed. Emeka didn't greet her, didn't ask how she was feeling, didn't glance at the belly that carried his child. He simply reached into his designer blazer, pulled out a brown envelope thick enough to choke a horse, and slammed it onto the kitchen counter, right beside the pot, right beside the lunch she'd been preparing for him. "Divorce papers," he announced, his voice flat and cold, like he was reading a grocery list. "You will sign today." The words hung in the air, heavy and impossible. Chioma blinked once, twice, her hand tightening around the wooden spoon. She set it down carefully, wiped her palms on her Ankara gown, and looked at her husband of 7 years. "Divorce?" Her voice came out gentle, almost confused. "Emeka, what are you talking about?" "Don't make this harder than it needs to be," he said, loosening his tie like he'd just finished a long day at the office instead of destroying his marriage before lunch. "I'm being generous. You'll get the Toyota Corolla. I'll send money for whatever." Whatever. Chioma's hand moved instinctively to her stomach. "Emeka, I'm carrying our baby." He shrugged. Actually shrugged. "I'll send money." Miriam stepped forward, her voice dripping with condescension. "Chioma, please don't argue. Don't embarrass yourself. My brother has risen.
He's a CEO now.
He deserves a woman who fits his new level, not a village wife who knows nothing about the corporate world." The woman in red, Funmi, Chioma would learn her name later, giggled behind perfectly manicured nails, the sound like breaking glass. Chioma's voice remained steady, though something cold was beginning to spread through her chest. "Emeka, I gave up my bank job to build our home. I stood by you when your father died, when you had nothing." "Exactly." Emeka cut her off, his tone sharp and dismissive. "That was the old chapter. The struggle chapter. I've moved beyond that now." He gestured toward Funmi with obvious pride. "I need a CEO wife. Someone who knows how to speak at board events, someone who looks the part. Not someone who sells akara at charity bazaars wearing bathroom slippers." Funmi smiled, tilted her head, examined her nails. Miriam added, "You should be grateful he's giving you the Corolla. Some men would leave you with nothing." Chioma stood there, for months pregnant, barefoot on her own kitchen floor, staring at 3 people who looked at her like she was an obstacle to be removed. The soup continued to simmer behind her, oblivious to the fact that everything was about to burn. The next words that left Chioma's mouth changed the temperature in the kitchen. Her voice was still calm, still gentle, but underneath it ran something else. Something that made even Miriam stop smirking for half a second. Does this mean you truly don't know? Emeka's face twisted with irritation. Know what? He snapped. Chioma, stop wasting our time. Sign the papers so we can all move on with our lives. Miriam rolled her eyes. I beg. We don't have time for drama. Sign and pack your things. But Chioma didn't move toward the envelope. She didn't cry. She didn't beg. Instead, she reached behind her and turned off the stove completely. The soup stopped bubbling. The kitchen went quiet except for the distant hum of the air conditioning and Funmi's uncomfortable shifting in her expensive heels. Chioma wiped her hands slowly on the kitchen towel, taking her time, each movement deliberate. When she looked up again, something in her face had shifted. The softness was still there, but beneath it was something Emeka had never bothered to look for. Steel. Unshakable, cold steel. Follow me, she said simply.
What?
Emeka barked. I'm not following you anywhere. Sign the damn papers. Chioma turned and walked out of the kitchen without looking back. If you want this divorce, Emeka, you'll follow me. All three of you. There was something in her tone, something that made Emeka's certainty flicker for just a moment. Miriam glanced at her brother. Funmi stopped examining her nails. And then, confused and annoyed, they followed her. Chioma led them down the long corridor past family photos they'd hung together years ago, past the living room where Emeka had been rehearsing his speech just an hour earlier, and stopped in front of a heavy wooden door at the end of the hall. A door that was always closed. A door Emeka had walked past 1,000 times without ever asking what was behind it. She pushed it open. The office was a time capsule. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined with legal texts, business journals, and leather-bound ledgers. A massive mahogany desk sat in the center, its surface neat and dust-free despite years of disuse. But what dominated the room were the photographs. Framed images of a man in traditional Igbo attire shaking hands with presidents, government ministers, oil tycoons, and foreign dignitaries. A man whose face appeared on magazine covers from the 1980s and 90s. A man whose presence still commanded respect even in stillness. Chief Obiora Nwosu, Chioma's father. Emeka had met him once, briefly, years ago at their traditional wedding. The old man had been sick by then, quiet, diminished. He died 6 months later. Emeka never asked questions. Never asked about the estate, the businesses, the empire that name carried across Lagos, Abuja, and beyond. Chioma walked to the mahogany desk and opened the bottom drawer. She pulled out a thick stack of files. Corporate documents, legal papers, certificates with official seals. She set them on the desk with a soft thud that somehow sounded louder than Emeka's earlier slam. She looked up at her husband, at his sister, at the woman in red. Before you take everything from me, Chioma said quietly, you should probably know what you're taking. Chioma pulled the first document from the stack and slid it across the mahogany desk toward Emeka. The paper made a soft whisper against the polished wood, but in the silence of that room, it sounded like a verdict being delivered. Read it, she said quietly. Emeka snatched the document, his jaw tight with annoyance. But as his eyes moved across the page, the color began to drain from his face. His hands started to tremble. The paper shook in his grip. What is this? His voice had lost its edge, replaced by something thin and uncertain. Chioma's response was measured, almost gentle, like she was explaining something simple to a child. That is the property deed for Plot 247, Adeola Odika Street, Victoria Island. The land where Prestige Holdings headquarters currently sits. You'll notice the owner's name at the bottom. Emeka's eyes shot to the signature line. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Chioma Obiora Okafor, she said for him. Sole owner. My father purchased that land in 1987. It passed to me when he died. Miriam rushed forward and grabbed the document from her brother's shaking hands. She read it once, twice, her lips moving silently. This can't be real. This is fake. You're trying to. It's registered with the Lagos State Land Registry. Chioma interrupted calmly. You can verify it yourself. In fact, Prestige Holdings has been operating on my property for 7 years. Rent-free. Funmi's perfectly painted lips parted. Wait, are you saying? I'm saying, Chioma continued, her voice steady as stone, that for 7 months, Prestige Holdings has failed to pay the agreed rent. And last night, at 11:47 p.m., I activated a formal eviction notice through my lawyers at Obi and Associates. Emeka finally found his voice. Eviction? You can't evict. 60 days, Chioma said, pulling another document from the stack. According to Nigerian property law, you have 60 days to vacate the premises or renegotiate terms with the landlord. That would be me. She placed the second document on top of the first. Emeka stared at it like it was a snake about to strike. Miriam's voice rose to a near shriek. This is insane. You're lying. Brother, she's trying to sabotage you on your big day. This woman is wicked. But Chioma's gaze never left Emeka's face. I hid my inheritance because I wanted you to rise on your own merit. I wanted you to build something real, something that wasn't handed to you by your wife's family name. I wanted you to be proud of yourself. Her hand moved to her pregnant belly. I loved you enough to stay invisible. Emeka's throat worked, but he couldn't speak. But you brought divorce papers to the wife carrying your child, Chioma continued, her voice cracking just slightly, revealing the wound beneath the steel. You stood in my kitchen, in my house, on my land, and told me I wasn't good enough for your new level. Funmi took a step backward, her red heels clicking softly. The giggling had stopped. Chioma reached for another file. Would you like to see what else you don't know? Chioma's fingers moved to the second file, thicker than the first, bound with a red ribbon that looked official and final. She untied it slowly, deliberately, letting the silence stretch until it became unbearable. Then she spread the contents across the desk like a dealer revealing a winning hand. Stock certificates.
Dozens of them.
Each one stamped, sealed, and signed by the Corporate Affairs Commission. Emeka's eyes widened. He leaned forward, his breath coming faster now, scanning the documents with growing horror. Miriam crowded beside him, her earlier confidence crumbling with every page she turned. These are... Emeka's voice was barely a whisper. These are Prestige Holdings shares. Yes, Chioma confirmed. Purchased 5 years ago, when the 3 founding partners were dying. Mr. Adeyemi had prostate cancer. Mr. Okonkwo's heart was failing. Mrs. Chukwu was drowning in debt from her husband's medical bills. They needed cash immediately. The company was weeks from collapse. Funmi had gone completely still by the door, her red dress suddenly looking garish and out of place in this mahogany tomb of truth. Chioma continued, her voice a scalpel. I bought out their shares through shell companies, LLCs registered in my maiden name, Obiora. I paid their medical bills. I cleared their debts. I kept Prestige Holdings alive during the 2020 recession, when every bank in Lagos refused to extend credit. I did this quietly, through lawyers and holding companies, because I didn't want you to feel small. I wanted you to feel like you'd earned your position. Emeka grabbed one certificate, then another, his hands shaking so violently the papers rattled. How much do you? 62%, Chioma said flatly. Controlling interest. The remaining 38% is split between the board members and minority shareholders. You, Emeka, own nothing. You are an employee. The word employee landed like a physical blow. Emeka's knees buckled. He actually collapsed, falling onto the Persian rug in his expensive Italian suit, his hands pressed to his face. I didn't know, he choked out. Chioma, I swear to God, I didn't know. Chioma looked down at him, this man who'd strutted into her kitchen an hour ago with divorce papers and a mistress, now crumpled on the floor like discarded paper. You didn't ask, she said, and her voice was so cold it could freeze blood. You saw me in sweatpants stirring soup and assumed stupidity. You saw me barefoot in the kitchen and assumed I was ordinary. You saw me give up my career and assumed I had nothing. Miriam was backing toward the door, her face ashen. Brother, get up. Let's go. We can fix this. But Chioma wasn't finished. I own Prestige Holdings, Emeka. All of it. The land, the shares, the future. And the CEO position you were celebrating this morning? She paused, letting the moment breathe. That exists because I allowed it to exist. Emeka looked up at her, tears streaming down his face.
Please.
Chioma, please. She reached for her phone. I'm calling my lawyer now. To do what? Emeka's voice broke completely. Chioma's finger hovered over the screen. To begin the removal process. Chioma pressed the call button. The phone rang twice before a crisp professional voice answered. Obi and Associates, good afternoon. This is Chioma Okafor. Connect me to Barrister Obi immediately. One moment, Ma. The silence in the room was suffocating. Emeka remained on his knees, his expensive suit wrinkled and twisted, his face a mask of disbelief and terror. Miriam had pressed herself against the wall, her earlier smugness replaced by something that looked like panic. Funmi had her hand on the door handle, clearly calculating her escape. Mrs. Okafor. Barrister Obi's deep voice came through the speaker. I've been expecting your call. Begin the removal process, Chioma said calmly. Effective immediately. Emeka's head snapped up. Remove who? He screamed, his voice cracking with desperation. Chioma, remove who? Chioma lowered the phone but didn't end the call. She looked at her husband with eyes that had gone completely cold, and when she spoke, each word dropped like a stone into still water.
You.
Effective today, you are fired from Prestige Holdings.
No.
Miriam lunged forward, her voice rising to a shriek. You can't do this. Emeka made that company. He built it from nothing. This is his life's work. Chioma didn't even glance at her. She kept her gaze locked on Emeka as she spoke.
No.
I made the company possible. I funded the founders when they were dying. I saved Prestige Holdings during the recession when every door in Lagos was closed. I bought out the debt. I paid the medical bills. I made sure my husband would never have to kneel before another man begging for help. Her voice began to rise, the emotion finally breaking through the steel. I made sure he would never know hunger again, never know shame again, never feel small again. She took a step closer to where Emeka knelt. But he knelt anyway, not before struggle, not before honest need. He knelt before betrayal. Emeka pressed his palms together as if in prayer, tears streaming freely down his face now. Baiko, he sobbed in Igbo, his voice breaking. Baiko, Chioma, I beg you, please. I made a mistake. I was foolish. Please don't do this. Barrister Obi, Chioma said into the phone, her voice steady again. Draft the termination letter. I want it delivered to the board within the hour. Understood, Mrs. Okafor. It will be done. Miriam rushed forward, reaching for the phone. You wicked woman. You evil. Security. Chioma's voice cut through the room like a whip. Somewhere in the house, footsteps began approaching. Emeka crawled toward her, actually crawled, his knees scraping against the rug. Chioma, please. I have nothing without this job. Nothing. She looked down at him, and when she spoke again, her voice cracked like thunder, shaking the very air between them. You asked for a divorce, Emeka. You said I wasn't good enough for your new level. You brought that woman into my kitchen while I carry your child. She paused, letting each word land with full weight. Now you'll get your divorce, but you'll get it with nothing. The security guards appeared in the doorway. Escort them out, Chioma said. All 3 of them. 2 security guards stepped into the office. Men Chioma had employed herself, men who knew exactly who paid their salaries. They moved toward Emeka with professional courtesy, but unmistakable firmness. Sir, please come with us. Emeka looked up at them, then back at Chioma, his face streaked with tears and snot, all dignity abandoned. Chioma, please. Not like this. Let me explain. Let me. Now, one of the guards said, taking Emeka gently but firmly by the arm. They lifted him to his feet. His legs barely supported him. As they guided him toward the door, he kept turning back, reaching for her, his voice breaking into desperate fragments. The baby. Chioma, our baby, please. Funmi had already disappeared. The woman in the red dress had slipped out the moment the security guards arrived, her expensive perfume the only evidence she'd ever been there at all. No goodbye to Emeka.
No loyalty.
Just the click of designer heels vanishing down the hallway and out the front door. But Miriam wasn't finished. She planted herself in the doorway, blocking the guards, her face twisted with rage. You think you've won? She spat at Chioma. You think you're something special because your dead father left you money? My brother made you. He gave you a name. He gave you purpose. And this is how you repay him. Chioma's voice was ice. Remove her. You're wicked, Miriam screamed as the 3rd guard approached. A wicked, evil woman. You'll pay for this. God will punish you for destroying a good man. The guard took Miriam's arm. She tried to pull away, still hurling curses as they escorted her through the corridor. Her voice echoed through the mansion, insults in Igbo and English, promises of karma and divine retribution, until finally, the heavy front door closed behind her with a decisive thud. Silence fell over the house like a burial shroud. Chioma stood alone in her father's office, surrounded by the photographs of a man who'd built empires, and she allowed herself one moment, just one, to feel the weight of what she'd just done. Then she straightened her shoulders, touched her belly where her son was growing, and walked back to the kitchen to turn off the stove completely. By 6 p.m., the news had leaked. Someone from the board, perhaps. Or maybe one of the lawyers. It didn't matter. Nigerian business media moved like wildfire. The headlines appeared first on Twitter, then Instagram, then the major news sites. Breaking: Emeka Okafor terminated as CEO of Prestige Holdings, same day as appointment. Wife owns 62% of company husband thought he built. CEO fired hours after serving pregnant wife divorce papers. By nightfall, the story had become a wildfire. Social media exploded with commentary, memes, think pieces. Videos of Emeka's morning press conference were being replayed with new context. His arrogance reframed as delusion, his confidence exposed as ignorance. Business partners began distancing themselves immediately. Calls went unreturned. Invitations were quietly rescinded. The man who'd been Lagos's rising star that morning became its cautionary tale by evening. Emeka's phone died from the flood of messages, some mocking, some pitying, most just shocked. By midnight, he was staying at a budget hotel in Yaba, staring at his phone, watching his life disintegrate in real time across every platform. His name became a hashtag, a warning,
A punchline.
and in her Lekki mansion, Chioma finally allowed herself to cry. 3 months later, on a humid Thursday morning, Chioma Okafor gave birth to a 7-pound baby boy at Lagoon Hospital in Ikoyi. The delivery room was quiet, professional, filled only with the sounds of medical efficiency, and then, finally, the piercing cry of new life. "It's a boy," the doctor announced, placing the squirming, pink bundle onto Chioma's chest. She looked down at him through tears, this tiny human with his father's nose and her father's determined chin, and whispered, "Daniel, your name is Daniel Okafor." No husband stood beside her bed. No family crowded the recovery room with balloons and flowers. But her lawyer came,
Her pastor came.
and 3 women from her church's widow support group came, women she'd served akara to at charity bazaars, women who'd never forgotten her kindness. They were enough. 2 weeks later, on a Sunday morning, Chioma stood on the balcony of her Lekki mansion, Daniel asleep in her arms, wrapped in soft white cotton. The Lagos skyline stretched before her. Gleaming towers catching the early light, the distant shimmer of the lagoon, the endless hustle of a city that never stopped moving. She'd been born into this view. She'd hidden from it for 7 years. Now she owned it again. Under her leadership, Prestige Holdings had transformed. She'd restructured the executive team, brought in a seasoned CEO named Dr. Olyumide Badmus, and implemented expansion strategies her father had drafted decades ago. Within 3 months, the company's value had tripled. Investors who'd written off Prestige as a dying agricultural firm suddenly saw it as the future of Nigerian agribusiness. But Chioma's most important work happened quietly, away from boardrooms and balance sheets. She'd established the Chioma Obiora Foundation with a single mission: supporting women abandoned during pregnancy. Legal aid, medical care, housing assistance, job training. Everything she'd had, but so many others didn't. The first woman she helped was 23, pregnant with twins, thrown out by her husband after he secured a promotion. "I don't know how to thank you," the young woman had sobbed in Chioma's office. Chioma had simply held her hand. "You thank me by surviving, by thriving, by teaching your daughters that a man's validation is not their value." The interviews came next. CNN Africa, Channels TV, The Guardian, Al Jazeera. They all wanted to know how she'd done it. How the village wife had owned the empire all along. In every interview, Chioma said the same thing, her voice calm and unmistakable. Silence is not weakness. It is calculation. She refused to speak Emeka's name publicly, refused to give him even that much power. When journalists pushed, asking if she regretted her actions, she would simply adjust baby Daniel in her arms and say, "I regret nothing that led me to protect my son's future." Now, standing on her balcony with Daniel sleeping against her heartbeat, Chioma looked out over the Lagos she'd reclaimed and whispered a prayer her father used to say, "Let those who underestimate you fund their own destruction." Daniel stirred, made a small sound, settled back into sleep. Chioma smiled. The kingdom was built, and she'd chosen who would enter it. Present day. Emeka Okafor stands behind a cramped bar in Surulere, wiping down sticky counters and serving bottles of Star and Gulder to men who don't know his name and wouldn't care if they did. He earns 85,000 Nigerian nairas a month, barely enough to pay rent for the single room he shares with 2 other men in a compound where the generator rarely works and the water runs brown. The bar closes at midnight. Most nights, Emeka stays late, sitting alone in the corner with whatever drink the owner lets him have for free. He pulls out his phone, the screen cracked now, the expensive case long sold, and scrolls through old photos. The Leckie mansion, the Italian suits, the press conference where he'd announced his CEO position, grinning like he owned the world. He'd own nothing. Sometimes, late at night when the alcohol makes him honest, he whispers her name into the darkness. Chioma. And then, as if God is listening from the water-stained ceiling, he asks the question that torments him. Why did I throw away gold for glitter? No answer ever comes. He's sent messages. Dozens of them. Apologies, explanations, desperate pleas to see his son. She never responds. Not once. Chioma Okafor chose peace over pity, silence over spectacle. She blocked his number after the first week and never looked back. Meanwhile, every Sunday morning at 9 a.m., millions of women across Nigeria, across Africa, across the world, open their phones and wait. They wait for Chioma's weekly video. Always filmed from her balcony, always with baby Daniel in her arms or playing at her feet, always with the Lagos skyline glittering behind her like a crown. This Sunday, like every Sunday, she speaks directly to the camera, her voice steady and strong. Never measure a woman by the role she chooses to play, she says, adjusting Daniel on her hip. He's walking now, 16 months old, his father's nose but his mother's eyes. Some queens remove their crowns to build a kingdom. They cook. They clean. They serve. They stay quiet while men mistake their humility for stupidity. She pauses, lets the words settle. But once the kingdom stands, once the foundation is laid, those queens decide who enters. And if you brought divorce papers to her door? If you called her ordinary while standing on land she owned? If you paraded another woman in front of the wife carrying your child? Chioma's smile is gentle, but her eyes are steel. Then you chose your own exile. The video ends the same way it always does, with a Bible verse displayed on screen. Proverbs 16 verse 18. Pride goes before destruction, a haughty spirit before a fall. The comments flood in immediately. Thousands of women sharing their own stories of being underestimated, discarded, overlooked. Thousands more thanking Chioma for showing them that silence isn't surrender, it's strategy. And in a cramped bar in Surulere, Emeka watches the video on his cracked phone screen, tears running down his face, knowing he is the cautionary tale she never has to name. What would you have done in Chioma's position? Would you have forgiven? Would you have fought? Or would you have done exactly what she did? Reminded the world that underestimating a quiet woman is the most expensive mistake a man can make? Let me know in the comments. And if this story gave you chills, if it reminded you of your own power, share it with someone who needs to hear it.
Subscribe and stay blessed.
Stay powerful, stay patient, and never, ever let anyone mistake your silence for weakness. The lesson Chioma taught didn't end with Emeka's fall or her rise. It rippled outward like stones dropped into water, touching lives in ways she'd never anticipated. 6 months after her viral Sunday videos began, a young woman named Adi showed up at the Chioma Obiora Foundation office in Victoria Island. She was 28, pregnant, and carrying a folder thick with documents. Her hands shook as she placed it on Chioma's desk. "My husband served me divorce papers yesterday," Adi said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He just got promoted to regional manager. Says I'm too local for his new position. Says I don't fit." Chioma looked at the young woman across from her and saw herself 3 years ago. The same fear, the same betrayal, the same confusion about what to do next. But she also saw something else. Something she'd learned the hard way. Tell me, Chioma said gently, leaning forward. What does he not know about you? Adis blinked, confused.
Ma.
What have you been hiding? What strength have you kept quiet about because you wanted him to feel like the man? Adis' eyes filled with tears, but behind them, something flickered. Recognition. She opened her folder and pulled out a single document. I've been writing, she said softly. Stories. Novels. I published them under a pen name because he always said creative work was a waste of time. She slid the document across. Last month, Netflix optioned my book series. The deal is worth $2.3 million. He doesn't know yet. The contract is still being finalized. Chioma smiled, not with satisfaction, but with understanding. Then you already have everything you need. You don't need my foundation, sister. You need a good lawyer and the courage to stop hiding. 3 months later, Aita's story made headlines. Author behind best-selling series revealed after husband's public divorce attempt. The Netflix deal went through. Her books hit international bestseller lists. And her ex-husband, the regional manager who'd called her too local, became another cautionary tale in the growing collection of men who'd mistaken their wives' quietness for nothing. But not every story ended in triumph. That was the harder lesson Chioma had to teach. One evening, a woman named Blessing came to Chioma's mansion, not for legal help or financial support, but for something more painful, permission to grieve. I did what you said, Blessing sobbed, sitting across from Chioma in the same office where she destroyed Emeka. I stood up to my husband. I showed him the business I'd been building in secret. I told him I wasn't the nothing he thought I was. She paused, wiping her eyes. And he beat me. He destroyed my shop. He told me that if I ever embarrassed him like that again, he'd kill me. Chioma's heart broke. Because this was the truth some people didn't want to hear. Not every man responds to a woman's power with humility. Some respond with violence. She took Blessing's hands in hers. This is not your failure, Chioma said firmly. Standing up to him was not wrong. But standing up safely, that's what matters now. Some men will never see you as equal. Those men are not men to fight. They are men to escape. Within a week, Chioma's foundation had relocated Blessing and her 3 children to a safe house in Abuja. They helped her file for divorce, get a restraining order, and rebuild her business in secret until she was strong enough to stand alone.
No dramatic reveals.
No public confrontation. Just survival, strategy, and eventual freedom. Chioma began addressing this in her Sunday videos. The complexity of power, the danger of pride, the difference between a man who can be humbled and a man who can only destroy. Not every battle is won by revelation, she told her millions of followers one Sunday morning. Sometimes the greatest power move is a silent exit. Know the difference between a man who made a mistake and a man who is a mistake. One can be taught. The other can only be escaped. The Bible says in Ecclesiastes 3 verse 7, there is a time to be silent and a time to speak. Chioma had learned both. She'd been silent for 7 years, building in the shadows. Then she'd spoken once, and the truth had shattered lies. But she also knew when silence was survival, not strategy. 1 year after Emeka's fall, something unexpected happened. A letter arrived at Chioma's office, handwritten on cheap paper, the handwriting shaky but sincere. Dear Chioma, I don't expect you to read this. I don't expect forgiveness. But I need you to know that I finally understand what I destroyed. Not just the marriage, not just my career. I destroyed the most valuable thing I ever had, your respect. I see you on the videos every Sunday with our son. He is my nose. He has your strength. I will never know him, and that is a punishment I accept. But I pray he grows up knowing what I failed to learn, that a woman's quiet service is not weakness. It is a gift. And when a man treats that gift like garbage, he loses everything. Asterisk. I don't ask for reconciliation. I ask only that you tell Daniel, when he's old enough, that his father was a fool who learned too late. Tell him to honor the women who build in silence. Tell him to never mistake humility for inferiority. I am sorry. I will be sorry until my last breath. Emeka. Chioma read the letter once, then placed it in a locked drawer in her father's desk.
She didn't respond. Didn't post about it.
Didn't use it for content or validation. She simply acknowledged that even fools can learn, even if the lesson comes too late to save them. That Sunday, her message was different. Forgiveness, she told the camera, Daniel playing with blocks at her feet, is not about them. It's about you. Forgive so the bitterness doesn't poison your future. Forgive so your children don't inherit your anger. But forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation. You can release someone and still refuse to let them back into your kingdom. She paused, looked directly into the lens. I have forgiven my ex-husband, but the gates remain closed. That is my right. That is every woman's right. To build peace without proximity. To heal without reopening the wound. The comments flooded with women sharing their own journeys, some who'd reconciled, some who'd walked away, all learning that power wasn't about revenge or restoration. It was about choice. And perhaps that was the deepest lesson of all. Chioma didn't win because she destroyed Emeka. She won because she refused to let his betrayal define her future. She won because she built something larger than her pain, a foundation that fed hundreds, a company that employed thousands, a son who would grow up knowing his mother's name meant strength, not suffering. Proverbs 31 verse 25 says, "She is clothed with strength and dignity. She can laugh at the days to come." Chioma Okafor wore that strength every day. Not in designer dresses or boardroom power suits, but in the same Ankara house gown she'd been wearing the day her world ended and began again. Because true power, she'd learned, isn't about what you wear or where you stand. It's about knowing your worth when everyone else has forgotten. It's about building kingdoms in kitchens. It's about removing crowns to lay foundations, then choosing, always choosing, who gets to stand on what you've built. What would you choose? Power or peace? Revenge or restoration? Victory or vindication? The answer isn't simple. And that's the point.
Stay blessed.
Stay discerning. And remember, the woman stirring soup today might own the world tomorrow. Never forget that.